Scandal and Grays were just so much fun to do. And a lot of it was because, of the other writers that you get to hang out with.
Hello, my name is Julia Steyer, and welcome to episode 2 of Players, Performers, and Portrayers, the podcast. Today we are joined by Mark Wilding, who is an LA-based television writer and producer. He's worked in both the sitcom and drama worlds for 27 years, and his credits include Ellen, The Tony Danza Show, Jake 2.0, Grey's Anatomy, and Scandal. Mark served as co-executive producer and executive producer on Grey's Anatomy for 7 years before moving on to serve as executive producer and head writer on Scandal for 5 years. Mark is currently a writer and executive producer on the NBC show Good Girls. Let's get started. I'm really excited to kind of talk about how you got started in writing. So you've stated in previous interviews that you originally thought you were going to be a journalist. How did you get involved in writing for television instead?
Well, I was a journalist out of college a couple of years. I was a sports editor for a couple small town papers, actually in Atlanta. And I kind of had a thought that I sort of wanted to get into maybe writing for the screen. And what reinforced that thought for me was the fact that I was getting paid like $170 a week. This is, mind you, back in the early sort of 80s it wasn't a great way to make a living. It was a fun way to make a living, but it wasn't, it was, I think that worked out to about $9,000 a year or something like that. So I thought I'd just give Hollywood a try. So I moved here in 1984, actually, to try to make it out in Hollywood. So it's been a while. It's been almost 40 years, as a matter of fact.
What was your first job writing-wise out here in Hollywood?
Well, it's funny. I was actually I worked as like a assistant buyer, then a buyer for old department store chain out here called Broadway, and so I was writing on the side, trying to break in. Writing some very bad scripts as I look back on them. But that's just all part of the process.
Yeah, got to start somewhere.
It took me like 9 years to actually sort of break into where I was making a living at it. And my first job was on a show called These Friends of Mine. It was a sitcom with Ellen DeGeneres, which then the name of that got changed to Ellen. But yeah, that was my first job. Neil Marlins and Carol Black, who created The Wonder Years and Growing Pains, they gave me the job. And part of that was actually, I had written a Seinfeld spec, which they liked, but I'd also written a play that won this playwriting festival up in Santa Rosa, California. Got put on up there, and then I subsequently got put on down here. And a couple people from Disney saw it, said, would I be interested in maybe writing for TV? So they were the ones that sort of helped set up meetings for me. And then I ended up, so that was my first job on These Friends of Mine. Oh,
that's fantastic. So your playwriting and your screenwriting have always kind of really gone hand in hand then?
Yeah, they have. Although once I got into the world of sort of writing for television, I had been a member of, a member of Theater West for over 30 years. Okay. And so then when I got into TV, I still remained a member of Theater West, but I didn't really go very often. And I sort of, stepped away from playwriting. But it was always with the idea in the back of my mind that I would someday go back to it. So it took me almost like 30 years between my first play and my second play to do that. But I did return to it. So.
And I'm personally very curious about your work from going from a journalist to a screenwriter, because I've also worked as a journalist, and I know the struggle of trying to make a living on $50 an article here and there. So I'm just curious, was there anything in your television writing, or I guess flip that, is there anything about journalism that you think helped you as a screenwriter?
Well, it's interesting. I think it's just your sort of curiosity about stories. So that the first play that I wrote is called The Company Man. It was about the leak, this gas leak, this very famous gas leak from Union Carbide back in 1984. And it was sort of but I decided I was going to do like a black comedy based on that. And the leak happened in Bhopal, India. It was very sad, like 3,000 people were killed right away from it, and people were blinded. It was a terrible thing. But the interesting aspect of the story to me was the fact that the CEO of Union Carbide was wanted by the Indian government essentially for sort of manslaughter or for negligence, and he was on the run. And it was kind of just funny to my mind that a Fortune 500 company chairman was actually on the run and hiding out, in this case, in Connecticut. And, they wanted to sort of extradite him back to India, but there was no way they were going to, let the head of a Fortune 500 company be extradited back to India. So, that was sort of, as a journalist, I was interested in that story, but then, I thought as a playwright, that could be, my take on it was, looking at, first of all, what does it take to be the head of a Fortune 500 company? And, and all of a sudden you're on the run. It struck me as kind of a ludicrous sort of thing to be going through. And so in that sense, I think it's an appreciation for story, if that answers the question.
Oh, 100%.
Like being a journalist. And, you could either write a 600-page piece about it, or you could write a play and bring it to life with characters and stuff.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love it. What advice do you have for aspiring television writers? And is there anything you wish you had known when you first started out?
Yes, that's a good question. Well, I have a couple of pieces of advice, and I'm not much of an advice giver. I don't even really give much advice to my kids because I don't necessarily think I've led the kind of life that would lead you to believe that, that my advice is worth anything, but I'll give you a couple pieces of it. One of them is you have to persevere. You have to have perseverance, which is, I think you could say that for, being an actor or being a lawyer or anything like that you want to be. But the other thing is you have to have a thick skin because, I've read probably, at least hundreds and hundreds of scripts over the years from people who said they wanted me to sort of weigh in and have my opinion. But I'm always like, well, do you want me to be truthful or do you want me to say I love it? Yeah. Because chances are I'm not going to like it. I'm not going to love it, and I may not even like it. And people sort of they always say, oh, you have to give me the truth, but people don't always want the truth. Yeah. And so you have to have a thick skin, perseverance, and finally, though, you also have to have a learning curve. In other words, what is it that you're not doing that other people are who are making a living in the business? So you have to sort of look at yourself very objectively and saying, I don't really know how to do this, or I haven't figured out how to do that. And, in terms of what I would wish I'd sort of known earlier was just even the fundamentals of sort of writing a scene. The fact that it involves conflict and involves it, also that the scene should have a twist in it at the end that helps propel the story or move the character arc forward or hopefully do both. So those are things that I sort of wish I had known earlier in terms of figuring stuff out. Also, just your basic 3-act structure, because sitcoms have 3-act structures. Even dramas do, even though they might be broken up into 5 acts.
So it sounds like knowing the craft and also being able to take the criticism, knowing that it'll make you better, knowing it's not a personal thing. It's really, if you want to grow, here's how you grow. You just have to be willing to listen to it. Yeah. And just, figuring it out from there. Yeah, and doing things like, sometimes I'll read scripts and they'll have like a lot of typos in it. Like, well, okay, a professional writer's not going to have typos. And people say, well, I'm more interested in the writing. I'm not worried about the grammar. It's like, well, guess what? You need to be
read by somebody who does consider grammar to be important.
Yeah. What was your moment of, or did you have a moment of, oh crap, everyone else is doing something that I'm not. I need to start doing this if I want to take my writing seriously?
I'll tell you what, I had an interesting moment. I don't know if that was actually the moment, but it was sort of like, I've been out here for 2 or 3 years, and, 2 or 3 years in LA time is not a lot of time, actually, realistically. There are people maybe who do succeed in that period of time, but, whenever anybody says to me, I've been out here for a couple of years and nothing's happened, I'm like, well, I was out here for 9 years before I got my first job actually writing. So come back to me in 7 years and let me know how it's going.
We'll talk then, yeah.
We'll talk then. And I think for me, I was about 30. I've been here about 3 years. I came out when I was 27. And it was when I had, nothing was really happening. I was a member of Theater West, but, I wasn't able to I didn't really know many people out here in terms of finding an agent or finding a job or whatever. And when I applied to law school, and I actually got into law school. Took the the LSATs, and then I got UCLA law school. And I remember I had a conversation with my mom, who always was really supportive of whatever her kids did. I was one of 4 kids, and so and I said, well, I'm thinking about going to law school. And she said, oh, okay, well, that's very good, but just know that you're going to spend the rest of your life with lawyers, and is that something you want to do? And it was like, I was like, oh, because I thought, oh, the law is noble and all that sort of stuff. And I thought, oh, Christ, no. And by the way, I have a sister-in-law who's a lawyer. She's great. I know some lawyers. But anyway, that sort of opened my eyes to like, okay, if I don't want to be a lawyer, I better really figure out what I need to do here.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that was sort of part of like really studying sitcoms and studying scripts and studying how characters behave and, really getting a feel for it and how quickly a story has to start in a piece of writing. I get people will show me pieces of their writing and I'm like, well, this is great dialogue for the first 12, 15 pages, but guess what? There ain't no story here. And I think that's sort of a fault that sort of young writers do.
Yeah.
They're so enamored with the dialogue. It's like, well, that's all well and good, but I'm not gonna read anymore because I don't see any.
Yeah. What's the point of the dialogue? Yeah. Oh, interesting. Well, it's so inspiring to know that it took 9 years before things started to pick up, because your credits are like a mile long, and kind of it leads into my next question a bit is. You were the co-executive producer and executive producer on Grey's Anatomy for 7 years. Then went on to write for Private Practice, which I have to admit is my current quarantine binge. I have been watching that like crazy. And then in 2011, you moved to Scandal to serve as executive producer and head writer for 5 years. So would you share a bit about your journey in becoming such an integral part of Shondaland? Because that's amazing.
Well, it's funny. Yeah, I really that was definitely fun. My stint on Grey's Anatomy was sort of my stint on Private Practice was sort of just short-lived. That was just me filling in while they were looking for a showrunner to run that show. So I was there for maybe half a dozen episodes or so.
Oh, okay.
But as I say, yeah, Grey's for 7 years, and then Shonda asked if I would go. She wrote a wonderful pilot for Scandal. Then she would ask me if I would go run the show for her, and I was very happy to do it. I mean, I had a wonderful time on Grey's, but 7 years of tumors and cancer and all that sort of stuff, I was sort of ready to move on from that and try something else. But it was both Scandal and Grey's were just so much fun to do, and a lot of it was because of the other writers that you get to hang out with. And I think even today, that's why I sort of enjoy doing it, is because you're around a lot of very the actors as well, very funny, irreverent, smart people. And that's really what that was sort of the environment that I found myself in Shondaland. And, I think I had like a degree of success there because I think, Shonda has got a good sense of humor. She's really smart. She's fun to work with. I think she appreciated the fact that I could also be very upfront and honest with her about if I thought the story was working or if we were going awry with a character or whatever. And I also liked the fact that in Shondaland, there were a lot of flawed characters, which I think made it different from other television shows. And, they were all busy saving lives, so that redeemed them just about no matter what their character were.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, and I think that the same could be said for Grey's Anatomy and for Scandal. I mean, those people on Scandal were like almost monstrous, for God's sakes, including Olivia Pope. She had her own secrets and her own sort of crazy shenanigans that she was always up to. But I don't know, it was a lot of fun, and I think Shonda and I saw eye to eye on a lot of the storytelling, and and if she didn't like something I wrote, then she'd be very blunt about it. And again, that's where it helps to have a thick skin. So
I'm very curious about a drama's writer's room, because you hear a lot about in sitcoms that it's very much collaborative and people are pitching jokes and punching up each other's scripts. What's that process like for a drama?
It's sort of the same thing.
Okay.
I mean, people go in and, you have sort of storylines, and people will, you'll write a script and maybe this story will work and that won't 100% work. You'll also talk about how a story lays out, and, people will pitch things that they think could be funny in that storyline or dramatic or emotional or whatever. And so the good news about drama is, for the most part, the hours are much better than sitcoms. Sitcoms, you can those are sometimes killer hours. But in terms of the process, in terms of creating the story, keeping track of the characters and everything, it's pretty much the same, I think.
Grey's Anatomy enjoyed such incredible success and connected in such a powerful way with so many viewers. Now, that of course must have been gratifying, but was it also surprising as well? Was anybody, shocked that Grey's took off in such a way that it did?
Well, it's interesting. That's a good question. I came onto the show in the second season, and I remember I was sitting on a plane flying from LA to Phoenix or something, and sitting next to a woman. She was about 75, and after the course of a little while, she asked me what I did, and I said I was a TV writer, and I was on Grey's Anatomy, and of course this is when I was just starting out on the show. And she said, "Oh my God," she said, "I watched that with my daughter and my granddaughter." Oh. And I'm like, holy mackerel. I mean, to my mind, I've never heard of that. A show that was watched by, two or three generations of folks. A grandmother, a daughter probably who was maybe 40, and then her daughter was maybe, 17. So it was sort of like, wow. So that to me was like the first indication that, this show might have something. It might have legs there. And so I think what happens is you do get involved. You're in sort of a little bubble in a way. You're writing and you're doing all these various little, you're working in a writer's room and working in a little bungalow. So the success of the show is kind of cool, but you're never quite 100% sure. You feel it a little bit, but I don't know. You don't feel it completely until all of a sudden, like I know that when Shonda went to New York, she was like, she was mobbed by people.
Oh my gosh!
People liked the show so much, and and the show did very well in the ratings. And I think the year before that, I'd worked on a show for UPN, which was called Jake 2.0, which I thought was a kind of a cool, great show. But if you looked at the ratings, we were always 150th out of 152 shows, and all of a sudden, you're on Grey's, which is always in the top 5, and sometimes would even be number 1. So those are all kind of cool, delightful things that were kind of surprising. And then you get, Emmy nominations. And I remember we did an episode of mine where we went up to, it was the third season. It was a camping episode where all the guy doctors on the show went camping. And we actually shot a couple scenes on the streets of Seattle. And all of a sudden there were 500 women there that were supposed to be going to work. And they're not going to work. Yeah. They're just hanging out, waiting to see McDreamy and McSteamy and company. So it's kind of crazy.
What do you think it is about Grey's Anatomy that makes it so intergenerationally appealing?
I think the characters are just so... they're interesting characters. I mean, the medical stuff was always interesting, but people just, there were definitely sort of soap opera aspects to it, but the characters were always... They did surprising things, and they were grounded, and they had flaws that people sort of connected to. I remember one time seeing a billboard for Grey's Anatomy, and they showed 11 of the doctors on the billboard, and I thought, man, each of those people has a distinct personality. Yep. And that's, all credit to Shonda Rhimes for that. She was the one that sort of created the show, and then, we would add characters as the show went along. But, in the early going, it was amazing. Those people all had distinct personalities, and I think you don't get to see that a lot, especially on network television.
Yeah, it sounds like there was kind of somebody for everybody to root for, or to hate, or to love, and that's fantastic. And you've been a writer on a lot of these, but then you've moved into producer roles, co-executive producer, executive producer. What has been your biggest challenge as a producer?
Well, when you say you're executive producer or whatever, that just means you're still a writer, but you just do some more of the producing things like, casting, editing and stuff. Honestly, I think the biggest challenge as a producer on a show is sometimes, obviously I think there's a challenge in terms of it was good. It was interesting because on Scandal they were always, they always wanted to get on board with whatever we wanted to do. It was fantastic. Grey's Anatomy, most of the actors did, but sometimes it was a struggle to get them to sort of sometimes they didn't want to do a storyline, or they were very they're reticent to do something.
Oh, boy.
And that was always hard to sort of get them on board to do that. Like I wrote one where there's pigs are being stabbed, but to show, like, it's actually something that they did, the Army would do. They would stab pigs to sort of get doctors ready for, like, battle training.
Oh,
for
wow.
when, there were injuries came in from the battlefield. And they also did that in regular hospitals for trauma. And I remember Katie Heigl was not a fan of that at all. She thought it was horrible because, and so, but we ended up sort of compromising and ended up writing a scene where she talks about how pigs are sentient beings, and so there was a compromise that was reached there. So and I thought the episode was better for it. But and also sometimes you have directors who don't necessarily see what your vision is for the show, and then maybe they don't know the show as well. Most of the directors I worked with, have been great and fine, but there were some who were not, and then that becomes a challenge because they're like, they're ruining the show right in front of you.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That's no good. Especially when you're paying anywhere, it's costing you anywhere from $3 to $4 million to shoot an episode of TV, and you can't really go back and do much in the way of reshoots or anything like that because you're up against a production schedule. And so I would say that the problematic times were mostly like directors who did not understand what the show was about.
Oh, that is like stressing me out for you.
Yeah,
I can just imagine.
Stressful, believe me, and we had to fire directors sometimes who weren't getting it, and those are. It's never seamless. Let's put it that way. It looks it, but it isn't.
Oh boy! Oh yeah, the behind the scenes magic that really goes down, for sure.
Right.
You worked on this sitcom Ellen and helped write and produce the 4th season of the show, which culminated in the puppy episode, in which Ellen DeGeneres' character famously came out as gay. The episode won an Emmy for Best Comedy Writing. Can you tell us your thoughts on being part of such a groundbreaking moment in television history?
It's interesting. It sort of goes back to, again, like the popularity of Grey's Anatomy. You sort of, when you're in it, you don't really necessarily even think of it as groundbreaking. You just think, oh, this is kind of cool. Now, I will say that when, I think Time Magazine, they may have done a cover with Ellen, and then I think she also got interviewed by Oprah, who we also had on that episode. So then it's like, oh, I guess this is a big deal. It's sort of like, it almost surprises, you yourself, that it's happening.
Yeah.
And it is funny because when I was hired on the show, I was hired in the first season, then I was fired with a bunch of other writers, and then I was hired back in the 4th season.
Oh,
and
boy.
I remember in the first season, Neil Marlins and Carol Black actually told Ellen if she wanted to, she could play a gay character in the first season. And I think Ellen was pretty savvy, and she said, you know what, I don't know that people are ready for that yet, but then by the 4th time the 4th season came along, she thought that they were. And I thought it was very brave of her to come out and do that, because who knows what the reaction was going to be. But I think the reaction was pretty positive, because we also, we didn't we weren't lecturing to people. We were just saying, this is what it is, and I think it was a very funny episode. And I think as long as you can sort of address these things through humor and decent storytelling, that people will be on board with you.
Do you have, because you've written a lot of comedy, but you've also written a lot of drama, do you have a preference for one or the other?
I like, I like a hybrid. I like light dramas, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I could write a heavy duty drama without much humor in it.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you there was kind of a 30-year break between your first play and your next one. So after all of your success on television, what made you return to the stage?
It was just, I've always sort of wanted to, and I thought it just would be kind of fun to try, going back to theater. And I think I had things to say that I don't necessarily think would fly on TV and I've always loved going to theater and going to plays, and I thought, well, why don't I just sort of, try going back to that, and so it was great. It worked out great in the Theater West, where I sort of developed the play. Really, people really liked it there in its development stage, and so we decided to put it on as a full-fledged production. But I don't know, I think I sort of like both mediums, and I just wanted to sort of get back to doing some theater too.
Do you think it's because you mentioned that there's some things you can put on stage that maybe you can't put on TV? Is it just because the audiences are more receptive? Is it because there's more freedom in what people are willing to produce?
Yeah, I think so. And also, like, I mean, here's the funny thing. I actually think, as I think of Our Man of Santiago, which is about the overthrow of Salvador Allende in Chile back in the early 70s, I do think that, to my mind, that could possibly make sort of a good miniseries in a way. It wouldn't be quite as broadly comic as I have it on stage, but I don't know. I thought, as I was doing, I thought this could actually be a miniseries, but I don't know. I think people are, Hollywood is, don't forget, a lot of what Hollywood does is, they're adapting things. Mm-hmm. They do adaptations of plays or books or musicals or whatever, so that, Hollywood is a sort of a conservative institution in some ways, mm-hmm. in that they don't want to necessarily gamble on something that they haven't seen before. Like, right. Breaking Bad, that went to a whole bunch of studios before somebody actually took a chance on it. The pilot for Breaking Bad. Yeah. So it's one of those things where, Hollywood isn't necessarily going to take a chance on something. So this was my way of saying, well, this is a little bit of a chancy, dicey sort of topic or subject, and let's see how it goes with the play. So.
I know it only closed after 2 performances, which is such a shame, and I know COVID forced so many theaters to close their doors, which just breaks my heart. But what can you tell us a little bit about what the experience was of putting a play back up on its feet, and maybe how that differed for you from your work on television?
Yeah, I loved it. First of all, I had a great director. His name is Charlie Mount, and I had some wonderful actors who were all very much just loved it. And it was just cool, getting to see it rehearse, the play. And I felt sorry for the actors, by the way, because, they spent like 4 or 5 months of their life, getting to
that breaks my heart.
The play and know the characters and play the characters and memorize all the stuff they had to do. And it was just fun for me to see it all come alive under the direction of Charlie. And it was just, I don't know, it was cool. And it was one of those things, because, in TV, you write a script, you shoot it, you're done, 2 weeks later you're on to another script. And it was kind of cool just to see this go, transpire over the course of several months. Mm-hmm. It was neat to see it really come together. And it was a little nerve-wracking too, but, everybody, Charlie got all the actors where he needed them to be, and they all did a wonderful job with it.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Well, I hope that I hope it comes back after all of this, because I'd love to see it. It was a great read. I'm really anxious to see it on stage.
Yeah, no, thank you. It was, and as I say, they did a great job with it, and I think that, Theatre West has indicated that they would definitely bring it back. Mm-hmm. And realistically, it's probably not going to be back until next year sometime.
Right. And speaking of, I know the theaters are closed and production's halted on a lot of things, so it's okay if you don't have an answer for this next question, but what's next for you?
Well, I'm right now I'm on a show called Good Girls, mm-hmm. for NBC and Netflix. So we've just started our Zoom writers' room.
Oh, fantastic!
And which is kind of fun. Although I like 2 hours a day. We're doing like about 2 hours a day, and that's about all I can take on Zoom.
Yes.
Because people freeze, the frame freezes, or talk over people, and it gets to wear you down a little bit. I find.
Do you feel the process or the writing process is losing anything by being done over Zoom, or for the most part, have you still, despite those hiccups, been able to?
I think it's okay.
Okay.
Because I think it's fine, and we're still just discussing stories and character arcs and stuff like that. And I don't think we've lost anything right now. And then the idea would be that people then go off and write scenes for a particular episode. Mm-hmm. But then the question is when we shoot it. And right now we're supposed to shoot at the end of October, start shooting. But who knows if that's going to happen? Because if I'm an actor, do I want to go on set and risk getting COVID? No matter, people talk about all the various precautions and protocols you can put in place, but I don't know. Somebody stays out late one night, or has friends over, and either an actor or a member of the crew, and all of a sudden, a week later, 4 people have got it. I think it's very dicey, and I don't know that the studios necessarily have the answers for it yet.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. It's like everybody has to be on board 100% in order for it to work in terms of the precautions. And
yeah, and I think what happens is, I think it's okay if, say, you have a movie and you're able to actually, isolate or quarantine the whole crew for, say, a couple of months. But a TV show takes place over, writing, production, all that sort of stuff. Editing takes place over a course of 7, 8, 9 months.
Yeah.
So, you can't ask people to quarantine for that length of time.
Yeah. Oh boy.
So I'm doing that, and then I'm also writing another play.
Oh, but yeah, this is the perfect time to do that, I feel.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. And then I'm also just taking long walks in the neighborhood. long, soulful, thoughtful walks every day.
Oh, I feel that. I feel like I've become very intimate with my neighborhood, as I'm like, oh, I now know every corner of this little subdivision.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Next I'm just going to start memorizing addresses.
Yes.
I'm going to be like Rain Man. I'll be able to tell you the address of every single house.
Exactly. Fantastic. And my final question for you is there anything I should have asked, or anything you would like people to know about you or your work or anything?
No, not really. I mean, you've done a wonderful job asking me just about, everything. What do I miss? I miss, going out to dinner and going out to lunch with friends and during this time. I still get out to play golf occasionally, so
good.
That's good. Anyway, yeah, so I guess that's about it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure talking with you. And I hope you continue to stay healthy, safe, and sane during this time. And to everybody listening, thank you so much for tuning in with us today. Have a good one.